otherwise it's really important.
Okay. Welcome everyone to Dialogue 17, probably our busiest yet, which is no doubt testament to the quality of the work that Camille, Marianne, and Angela and their team have been busily making over the last 3 years in Zurich. When we were kind of setting this up, we were keen that it would be an in-person event, so we're really grateful that you guys could travel from Zurich and Brussels to be here. I won't say too much about the office because I think that will be part of the presentation, but just a bit about the format. We're sort of hopeful that the more intimate, it's not that intimate, but the more intimate setting sort of enables a kind of spontaneous dialogue and conversation afterwards. So don't hold back with questions. And normally we'll sort of mill around for a bit and then head to the pub afterwards as well. So hopefully we'll stick around for that. Virus games. One there. And then back the way you came.
And there's one left there.
Oh, yeah. So 3 forest games, one there, back where you came, and then it was really bad. Really hot. Around there. That's it. So over to you.
Could you put your password in so we can show the presentation? Crucial step. Okay.
I'll open the preview.
Oh. So we will, Marianne, Angela, and I, we will all present, but I will start. I first want to start with thanking for the opportunity to present here and everyone involved with organizing the lecture. I'm also very grateful that there are so many people in this room, which we definitely didn't expect. And also it's really nice to see some familiar faces. As a young office based in Switzerland, it's very nice for us that we have this opportunity to present to a room of Londoners, because London is a very important city, and as an office we have a very strong connection to the city, because Marianne is from Switzerland, Angel is from Spain, I'm from Belgium, and we actually met each other for the first time here in London when we were working together as colleagues at Service and Bates Architects. Our lecture is called Anybody Home? However, before we dive into the projects that we selected, I would like to start with sharing some words on our practice and on the way we work. Starting with the way we work, or explaining the way we work, starts with a very specific place. We have our studio in Atelier Kobo. And Kobo is a Japanese word which means workshop. And it symbolizes a place where ideas can be realized and a place of free creativity. It's a large room on the ground floor of an office building in the center of Zurich from the 1960s. And this room has had many previous lives. It was originally built as a showroom for sanitary equipment. Afterwards, it was transformed into a rock club. And its current destiny, but maybe, or its current use, maybe not the last one, is Atelier Kobo. And the transformation that we did was also one of our first projects. And there are still a lot of signs of these previous uses visible in Atelier Kobo. For example, here there's the sign WC Smokers Bar, and obviously we don't have a smokers bar in our office. It's something we inherited from the Rock Club. We also share the space with Natalie, a ceramicist, and Denny, a photographer. However, the space is all open. It's essentially one big room, only divided with furnitures and in Natalie's case, also a raised podium. These are pictures of Natalie's workshop space. Atelier Kobo also has a small multifunctional space, this space, and also a small shop where Natalie sells her ceramics and we sell the furniture we make. And in that sense, Atelier Kobo is also open to the public. Natalie organizes ceramics workshops. There are sometimes small exhibitions. And these ideas of openness, collaboration, but also simply having our office in a big room, a robust room with a lot of flexibility, obviously influences the way we work a lot. Here on the right, you see very first humble attempts of making ceramic models, which we are doing now for a competition we are working on. Not an anonymous competition, so we can share the pictures. But for example, here, these tests we made roughly 2 years ago. We also made color studies by casting tiles ourselves. These color studies were for a project in Winterthur, which we did as a collaboration with Lorenz and Georg Bachmann. And it was a design. It was a design for a garden pavilion for a pianist, and she would use it for, Elisabeth would use it for piano rehearsals, small garden concerts, and giving piano courses. And for this project, we designed and also produced the facade and roof tiles. And it was the result of a very rigorous color study to which the picture on the left testifies. Here on the left, you see pictures during the production process. We made the tiles actually in a workshop in Spain. And here you see the tiles being installed onto the pavilion. You can also see this small drawing here. This was also a collaboration with Natalie, with whom we share Atelier Kobo. And she made 5 little drawings that we casted into 5 special tiles that are spread over the pavilion. With the same technique, we also made a furniture range where we poured at the same time casted material with different shades, and in that way inviting experimentation and improvisation in the final form of the furniture. Here on the right, the molds are drying, and on the left, another picture of one of the pedestals. One of the later or more recent material experiments we did was this model we made for the Swiss Art Awards. Unlike despite its appearance as almost a bronze material, this is actually made from wax, and it's called sugarcane wax. And here, Wei, who was working with us at the time, is very carefully applying the wax onto a metal substructure. And when referring to these activities, we like to borrow the words of Richard Sennett, because for us, these kind of projects, they represent the hand, direct material engagements. As a counterpoint to the hand, and these are also the words of Richard Sennett, there is the head. And for us, the head symbolizes research and teaching, which are also a very important activity for our office. Angel is a postdoc researcher at ETSA Barcelona and TU München, and very recently obtained his PhD on the works of Mario Ridolfi, Italian architect. And we are now, as an office, also working on a publication on Mario Ridolfi. Marianne is, since 2019, leading a design studio at the University of Lucerne. She's here, presenting. And I've also taught at Kingston School of Arts. There's actually a former student of mine here as well, which is a very nice surprise. And at the moment, I'm collaborating with the chair of effective architectures, led by Anne Fontaine at ETH Zürich. Of course, these slides seem to suggest a very clear division between the head and the hand, or thinking and making. But as a practice, we are actually very much interested, or we believe in a dialectic relationship between these two activities. We like to refer to the idea of thinking through making, and these two activities, the head and the hand, together with a more traditional interest or the traditional discipline of architecture, roughly define the identity of our practice. Now I'd like to pass the mic to Angel.
I can continue. But tonight we were thinking to present you some of our latest residential projects, because we thought they could trigger more a dialogue after in the ways systems and nations work in Switzerland and how the reality is here in the UK. And when having to choose the topic, we thought about this small book from Pierre Soeli, who under the title Anybody Home revisited some of his single home proposals and conversated with its inhabitants. The conversations recollected observations on their life experience and in their relation to those spaces. The visits to these houses in both sides of the Atlantic showed us as architects asking simple questions, what we can learn from different cultures, personal stories, communities and places, while defining how their built environment should look like. The projects we will present, some of them, they are competition stage, others are in construction site, and others are now in our studios tables. Funny enough, there is no one actually inhabiting them yet, and however, the people will be the future inhabitants are very much present in our daily discussions. By showing the projects under this idea or under this quest, we can hope we can give you an input about the context where we work, show us how we try to find meaning in a place, and how through design we can investigate ideas and forms of living. So who lives here? We find ourselves in the small rural community of Bislingen, a picturesque landscape 30 minutes from the city of Zürich. A small settlement created literally by the close proximity of the buildings in a hilly site and its material character. The client was the Reformierte Kirche, so the Reformed Church, and they owned this plot here that is in between the church, like a school, and a community center. And the idea was to develop 11 apartments for multi-generational living, a cafe, some office spaces, with the idea that elderly people can move there, but also people from the city could be appealing to move to the countryside. In our drawings, wandering around the site, we identified a net of paths and places, small public spaces, that gave a kind of intimate scale to the place and defined a strong atmosphere. Some of them, they have a very public character, like the terrace in front of the church. Others, they feel more hidden, as this one that is mainly a place to sit and enjoy the views. The site brought into our mind the text from Joseph Frank, The House as Path and Place. And we thought that enlarging these paths and places from the urban sphere into the domestic realm could define the fundamental idea for the inhabiting the site. Blurring its limits had the potential to generate a closer relation between the inhabitants. The proposal was a simple volume. This one, what you see here, in close relation with the community center, creating a new greener terrace that somehow reacted to the one in the church, and then a greener garden in the back that extends towards the field. The steep section made us think about this path I was telling as something that can cross the building, but also can extend inside. And we envision like an idea of reducing the footprint and building in more height. We started by doing very small drawings of how this path could be, what will be the steps in this path. And we focus mainly on the most ritualistic aspects of daily life, how you arrive at home, how do you go up the stairs, how do you overlook the landscape. What excited us more in these drawings, following Frank's approach, was how through perceptual aspects, like what do you see, what are the dimensions of things, we could manipulate the moving through the space, create opportunities to linger, define the moments of encounter with the neighbors, and generate a livable ambience. Suddenly, we were working with those spaces in between, starting with the new raised platform, ending in the private terraces. Here we have this platform in relation to the community center. So this is a view you see from here to there. And these are the private terraces of the apartments facing south. The main entrance, it was imagined as an inside-outside space where all uses meet. Now we are seeing an image of this space. Straight, one enters the housing area and goes to the garden. Right are the offices, and the left is the cafe. The cafe wanted to reinforce the relation with the outside space and the village center, but also with another more private area towards the neighborhood that you see here in the back. Fundamental to this idea of path and place, there were the circulation areas and the more spaces that connect the apartment to the public. Sorry. And the idea was to, through these spaces, dissolve the relation between what is public, what is communal, and what is part of the private realm of the house. So an idea was trying to think where the door of your apartment starts and trying to bring farther away from its normal location. A long balcony towards the south was the most private space of every apartment, but at the same time, the most exposed. The loggia towards the quieter garden was accessed via the stair and the kitchens, offering an alternative access and a space to be shared. And here we see the long terrace I was telling, that it's all one space, but somehow more private from one, the second, and the third apartment, also by the clink in the facade. And here is the loggia, open towards the garden, with a second access in the kitchen for the apartments, and open to the stair. This space allowed us the feeling of communal living, with the people that lives in other floors, and you see going up and down the stairs. We imagine this second space as a space that could create interactions with the neighbors, joining tables outside for dinners, for example. The ideas of Georges Perec were also very influential. We were trying to move from the more functionalistic aspects of space to go up and down in the case of a stair, incorporating a place to sit next to it and making the outside-inside relation somehow more ambiguous. Overall, the building was designed with a very rational timber structure, mainly close to the three other orientations and open to the south facade to improve its climate performance. With a generous ground floor, 3 floors for living space, and under the roof apartments, the south facade was imagined as a filter, dealing with the privacy and publicity towards the village center, the views towards the landscape, and the light and climate control of the flats. The apartments on the typical floors combine different sizes, 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms. Their layouts followed a rigid structure, but by very different character of the outside spaces. The slightly bigger dimension of the rooms, very similar to the dimension of the living spaces. The position of the kitchens and the bathrooms, always on facade, and double circulation along the different spaces, we thought we would create an idea of living that could feel more flexible. On the top, we saw the opportunity to seek for a less traditional form of living. Following the pitch roof of the existing buildings, we propose an asymmetrical roof where the structure is again very present, but with a more open plan layout. In this case, the idea of living around the structure and under the roof became a way to give a new form to the more traditional ideas of living that one can find in the surrounding houses. The outside and in-between space carried the idea of paths and places till the very top. In here, in its more intimate iteration, the lodges are cutouts on the roof, closed inside the volume and not visible from the street, and however, when opened, they reinforce it with its views, the connections with the town center. And now the next project.
The next project we're going to present to you is a project in Meisterschwanden. It has nothing to do with my last name, but the place is called Meisterschwanden, and the client is the municipality of it. The aim of the competition was to convert the existing school of Meisterschwanden into a residential building to provide new space for living. The client didn't define a room program when they organized the competition, and nor gave they a number of apartments, and invited several architects to get new ideas. So with this competition they organized, they wanted to redefine the living in Meisterschwanden for this school type school building. So gladly we won, and we just started working on it this year, and we're very satisfied. The project, as mentioned, is about this old school building you can see here on the left side, which was built in 1888 and is one of its typical school typologies from its time. In Switzerland, there were not really buildings for education until the 18th century, but with new regulations and the compulsory of schooling during the 19th century, a new type of school was formed and was built all over Switzerland. So here on the right side you can see, for example, another school which was built in the city of Zürich, and is very comparable to the one we found in Meisterschwanden. There was a plan, a master plan created by Gustav Vorher, who's a German architect, and he developed this Schulhaus type. And as you can already hear from the name, like they already defined a Schulhaus instead of a school building, and this also influenced our design, which you can see later on. This type defined the size of classrooms, ventilation, the sanitary ventilation, and sanitary installations, and so forth. And the characteristics of this type lies in like a symmetrical plan, which was also found in our case, and a quite classicistic and representative facade. But with the new educational plan, which came in the 20th century, where the size of school classes got reduced and outside spaces needed to be more integrated in school buildings, these Schulhaus types started to be changed and refurbished in different uses, as it is in our case. From the start, when we saw the building, we were very fascinated by it, not only because of its setting and its local history, but also that it has this history of variety of use. After it has been used as a school, it was converted 100 years later into a local council building in 1986. And now, another 40 years later, new homes for living can be created, and another chapter of the school begins. Before we started with the intervention in the existing building, we considered the already found architectural qualities that the proposal could and should emphasize and expose. Like, for example, we really liked the high ceilings in the spaces, or the nicely vertically proportioned windows, or the roof structure, which we wanted to also integrate in the design. So, again, as in the project before, we asked ourselves, who's going to live here, and what kind of living do we want to design in this building? And we very soon liked the idea of designing a shared house, also coming from the Schulhaus definition. But what does a shared house mean? The idea is here to develop one big house with multiple communal spaces spread out through the house, and not to create separate parties which are working as individual apartments. So we distributed some communal spaces throughout the building, like for example here in green you can see a garden room which we introduced, which has a direct connection to the south garden. Then in red is the basement, which profits actually from daylight as the ground floor is lifted up from the ground, and we provide here a new hobby room. Then the staircase works in split levels, as mentioned that the ground floor is lifted up. So we designed new balconies attached to the split levels. And as the balconies are not at the same level as the apartments, they also work better as a communal space. And then on the top, in yellow, there is a gallery which also profits from daylight, where we can imagine people working from home and using the space there. The building is reached from the north side, from this side here, where you can also see the view on the right side. And the new balconies, which you can see here, they provide not only like a new space for the residents, but also create a little canopy and marking the entrance from this side. The slightly raised ground floor houses 2-bedroom apartments, and in between is the garden room. And with this arrangement, we really like the idea to emphasize again this entrance, which used to be the entrance of the school building before, and that we create this south-north axis throughout the building, and also that all the residents of the building can use this garden room and have this access towards the garden. In this picture here, you can see how we imagine this space here with the connection towards the garden, and here a scene with a shared meal of the people from the building. From the outside, so also in the 80s, they did quite a strong intervention in the building where they introduced these 4 columns, and we also wanted to keep them and make them visible so that the garden room can be used in a flexible way. This is like a view from the terrace looking inside the building, where we also added a new pergola to give shade and protection to the terrace side. And if you step further outside, looking back to the building, you can see this terrace again. We also kept the original structure of the outside space, which is defined in 2 different levels. And we imagine that with the new garden room, this garden is more like a private garden for the people who are living in the building, and the lower part can be used by the whole neighborhood. The first floor is structured in a very similar way as the ground floor plan, with the two-bedroom apartments, but instead of the garden room, you have a 1.5-bedroom apartment. And all the flats, they're characterized by a south-facing living space, and also what is very characteristic of this plan is that every room profits from double orientation, which you can see in this picture. As the existing building needs a new insulation layer from the inside, the outer wall gets thicker and takes some space from the living areas. So we planned these new big deep reveals, which are created in the windows on table height, that it can be also used as a space to work. In here, we are now in the living room of the two-bedroom apartment. You can see how the living room is profiting from the high ceiling and the vertical large window, which are giving the room a lot of light. The bedrooms also enjoy the already preserved characteristics of the spaces. The newly planned interior walls are made of a lightweight wood construction, which keeps the existing structure untouched. The top apartments benefit from its position under the roof. Inspired by the umbrella house from Katsuo Shinohara, we liked how the space under the roof can be inhabited by adding a steep ladder leaning against the roof structure. So we designed the top apartments as small studio flats, where the lower floor is the living room with a small kitchen situated, and in the upper floor is a sleeping space. So here is the sleeping area with the ladder and the living space, which you can see here illustrated. The window reveal in the top apartments follow a similar logic like the lower apartments. They also get a bit of thicker reveal, but in the top we chamfered the inner side of the window, which you can see here, to allow more daylight inside the apartment, but also keeping the existing facade, which is actually protected, the same, to keep the same appearance of the facade. Going up the ladder, you would arrive at the gallery, where you can see this visible roof structure and can provide new space for a bed and a workplace. Not visible from the outside, each attic flat contains a skylight that brings additional light into the whole apartment and allows a view to the outside from the upper floor. The next project we are going to present you lies in a complete different context. Now we are in the city of Zürich. Here we are in the part of the city called Audienicon, which is a very lively and heterogeneous surrounding. The project we are planning sits in a courtyard situation, which is here, and this is the view where you are standing here, looking towards the building. And as you can see, this site is very dominated by very large-scale buildings. So here, for example, this is one big housing project next to a huge office building, and here the structure of the city block starts. This is why our project tried to keep a simple massing, a simple volume, to be able to compete with these big scale projects which is surrounding it. Close by this site, here is the project, is also very dominated by infrastructure. So here you can see the rails. Then there is a river, which is also, and above the river is the highway located, which you can see here. But also, what is quite nice about the site, the greenery is also quite dominant. So it has a very heterogeneous and multiple atmosphere at this space. Again, we ask ourselves, what kind of living do we imagine here, and how this movement of the site from a more industrial area into a residential can inform our project. This is the reason why we looked at loft-like apartments like the one from Donald Judd, which you can see on the left side, where a similar transformation between industrial buildings and residential building took place. We enjoy a lot this reference, as it creates like quite a nice atmosphere, quite a nice balance between industrial elements of the architecture and domestic elements, like for example the visible structure of the building with the completely open facade glazed, but then with the inbuilt furnitures in timber, which create this homely atmosphere. So instead of thinking the plan, which you can see on the right, into a layout how to arrange the apartments in the floor, we thought the plan in arranging the structure, the circulation, and the services in a very compact and carefully placed way, to leave as much as free space around it. So here you can see how we compactly arrange the kitchen and the bathrooms together, and then the structure which keeps the whole circulation free, and that the building can be seen as one big space. For this project, we designed at the end 3 apartments, one is located here, one here, and one here. But we can also imagine that for future changes, this can be used as one big space for example, an office building. To transform this diagram into a more residential space, we organized the apartment with few elements to be able to define each spaces. In this apartment, for example, the curve of the main stair leads you from the entrance towards the living room, but with a small furniture like the cupboard or the kitchen, this can be read as an entrance space where you can go inside your living area to the bathroom and then to the bedroom. And then by adding materials like a timber floor, doors, painting the structure in white, this domestic and residential feeling is visible in this open and fluid plan. The bathroom, together with the kitchen, is designed to its minimum size, but can react and change the spaces around it. So here we really liked this reference of Lux Fourier, and she did a lot of beautiful buildings in Switzerland, and worked a lot with many careful designed details. And what we really liked here in this project is that she worked with 4 doors with 1 bathroom, which is actually quite a lot of elements coming here in this small space together. From this idea, it leads us to arrange our bathroom here as well, that we can imagine closing the bathroom completely and see this all as one big space, or closing, for example, only this door here, and this can be read as more a bedroom together with the bathroom, or closing these doors, and that you can read the plan as more differences of spaces. The 3-bedroom apartment is arranged in a very similar way. So, for example, here you can see that the bedroom, the 2nd bedroom, is actually placed in a very lightweight structure, which leaves the existing or the main structure of the building untouched. So we want to leave it free for the residents, that this can be all be used as one big space. The only elements which define this apartment are the partition walls, the placing of the bathroom and the kitchen, and the structure. Another important aspect was for us to keep the facade free, to be also able to create a lot of openings and multiple views throughout the apartment. So, for example, this view here is when you're standing in the bedroom and looking towards the living room throughout the apartment. At the end, this is how the typical floor plan looked like, with 2 2-bedroom apartments and 1 1-bed apartment. But with this project, we invite the residents to inhabit and make the space to their own, and reduce our part of the architecture to allow that to happen.
Thank you. That brings us to the last project of our presentation. This is a project in Schlieren, for which, again, the Reformed Church of Schlieren organized a competition 2 years ago. And the task of the competition was to design a Mehrfamilienwoning, so a multi-family home on one of the plots owned by the church. Schlieren is a municipality, on the eastern part of Zürich, south of the Limmat River. And for a very long time, it was independent village. And after, from the 50s onwards, because of the rapid industrialization, it grew part of Zürich. And Schlieren as an area is therefore characterized by the coexistence of large-scale industrial buildings, which can be seen here in the north of the site along the railway, but also a much older and much smaller scaled context here. And I believe the church, who is our client, is located here, and this is the site. The project is very much on our drawing tables at the moment, as we are finalizing the last drawings for the tender packages, and construction is planned to start next month. And Julia is the project architect, and she's also here tonight. And here on the left, we are celebrating the arrival of the Baugespann, which are posts which mark the outline or the volume of the new proposal, which is a part of the planning procedure in Switzerland. It feels almost a bit cruel to start explaining a project through building regulations, but Switzerland, like the UK, construction is very much regulated. And in these competitions, there's also an expectancy from the client and the jury that the maximum build volume is optimized as much as possible, which is a reality that we have to work with. So understanding these regulations and also working with these regulations is a very important part of these competitions. And we therefore also look at these regulations from the very beginning. Here the regulations, I'm saying the word regulations a lot. Here the regulations dictated that from the north and the south towards the neighbors, we step back from a certain distance. This motif of stepping back, we also applied it to the streets and the garden facades. And this gave rise to almost a dancing outline of the building, which steps in and out, as you can also see in the volume model. This stepping volume, although it was a result of the regulations, it gave us, we saw a lot of potential and qualities in it. For example, this is a view from the street, looking down the street, and we can see here the step. So all of a sudden, even though the building is located perpendicularly on the main road, you still have the opportunity to look along the streets. You also have the opportunity to, from within the building, look down into the garden. Or, for example, also the opportunity to look at your own facades from within the building, which we found very exciting. From this, we started to develop the idea of living along the facade. So rather as conceiving the plan as a matrix of rooms, we started to think about the plan as almost as a necklace of the daily activities that is unfolded along this stepping facades. So in this diagram, for example, sleeping, living, being outside enjoying the sun, dining, cooking, and working are all activities that are spread out along this changing facades. A reference that also, in that sense, came to our minds was Kaiser Bayres from CISA, where his folding screen also, in a very gentle way, guides the living spaces behind it. This is one of the typologies. The bathroom and the kitchen are placed centrally in the plan, and together with the shaped facade, the plan starts to take place. This is the entrance area, from which there's a door to the bedroom and an opening to the living spaces. From there, you have the loggia and the dining room, which for us almost starts to have the quality of a bay window as it starts to step out of the building from one side, which leads to the kitchen, the narrow kitchen, which then again leads to the bedroom. And the view here on the right is from the living room with the loggia on the right, and a look onto the dining room and the corner window that allows to have the long view along the street. What we like very much about this plan is that for us it sits somehow in between a Raumplan and an open plan. For us, the rooms, like the living room and the dining room, they are defined enough to still feel like a room. But on the other hand, the spatial continuity of the living spaces along the facade is still ensured and open. For that reason also, the doors are always placed along the facade to protect the openness along the facade. This view is from the kitchen looking back over the dining room towards the loggia. And also on the interior, we decided to raise the windowsill to 45 centimeters, so bench height, and extend the windows towards the ceiling. This allows us to revisit an idea which we think was very important in the arts and crafts movement, but somehow we seem to forget about this. But the idea of allowing dwellers to sit very close to the window or use the facade as a way to store objects. This is the typical plan of the whole building, where the typology is mirrored to the garden side, a very compact staircase on the north side of the plot, together with an elevator, and a third bedroom in between the two typologies. On the top floor, also because of regulations, we had to step back the volume to make Attika-Geschoss, which gave rise to a cross-shaped footprint of the top floor, and also gave rise to 4 generous terraces. The living spaces are organized towards the south and giving access to 2 south-facing generous terraces. And the 2 bedrooms give access to the northeast and northwest balconies. We also deliberately conceived the living spaces as a very narrow sequence of spaces. And this narrowness, for us, we hope that it will enhance the relationship to the outside spaces, so that in summer or in spring, if you open up the windows, because of the narrowness of the room, you get a stronger connection to the outside spaces. And this, for example, is a view from this living room overlooking the cupboard here, which divides the hallway and the dining area. And this is a view that we also like very much, because we hope that these terraces in summer, when the windows are open, will become rooms of their own. And here we like the idea that we almost create an enfilade of 3 rooms, of which 2 are actually outside spaces. So you look from terrace through the dining room through another terrace. When we were thinking about the presence on street for this proposal during competition stage, we were first drawn to precedents like Villa Beer by Josef Frank or Haus Wittgenstein, because somehow for us, as a scale, or the building for us sits either in between a small apartment building or a very large villa. And through these 2 references, we actually started looking at a very nice reference by Gerrit Rietveld in Utrecht. And what we like here very much is the proportions of the windows, which actually also arrive to the ceiling. But also what we enjoy is the somehow very simple composition of the facades, and that the windows are extremely flush in the facade. And as we wanted to create these benches, for us we also always started to imagine the facades as the windows as sitting as far out as possible to enlarge the windowsill. And this is a picture of the windows at the Rietveld building. In Zürich, there are also very nice examples of modernist projects from this period. This is a picture from the Rotachhäuser, built almost at exactly the same time. And what we also really like a lot in these kind of buildings is that that actually there's a very strong sense of materiality in these buildings. And also when you look closely, there are actually a lot of traces of crafts. And this is actually, for us, an aspect of modernity that is very often overlooked, where we associate it with sleekness and almost an absence of materiality. Whilst here, for example, they used a very rough render, and the sun blinds are covered with copper sheets, which is folded very craftfully. So when we started to think about the materiality of the building, we wanted to combine, on one side, a reference to its old context, to give it the atmosphere of a garden house, but on the other hand, also learn from these modernist precedents that inspired us. The facade is cladded with pine boards, which are painted with Schwedenfarben, which leaves the texture of the wood visible. And the boards, if everything goes well, will be nailed to the substructure with the nails staying visible. As the facade is, or as the windows sit very flush in the facade, I think the reveal is only 6 to 7 centimeters. The textile sunscreen walls also step out. And to protect them from the rain, we will use folded sheets of galvanized steel that are screwed onto the substructure of the timber boards. Additionally, we imagine the balustrade, which is composed from a steel rod and a steel frame. Also, they will be screwed onto the windows, and there will be a mesh spanned in between them. And then we arrive at the end of the presentation. The entrance is located on the north side of the building, very close to the stairs. And to reach the front door, you are guided along a curved glass, behind which there's a multifunctional room which belongs to all the dwellers. And as a reference to the folded sheets which protect the sunscreens, there's also a canopy created through a large piece of of steel, which is hanging from the facade. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. There's one very small thing that I still want to mention, but it's very important. Tonight, Angel, Marianne, and I presented, but this work is, of course, the work of a much bigger team. Both our previous collaborators, but also Keko, Julia, and Paul, who are here present tonight. So we also want to acknowledge that this is everyone's work. Of course. It's called dialogue. No?
I have a question, but it's more an invitation to talk. And I just wonder, one thing, how do you get these projects? Are you getting them through competitions or
All of them through
all of them through competitions?
All of them through competitions.
And the second one is your relationship with the clients. Is that a close, intimate relationship, or are you in your workshop and how sometimes you then shop them with this insanely nice material? They have no choice.
I mean, this, I think, a question that we should all answer. But from my side, what's a bit special about competitions with a system in Switzerland is that they expect you really to present a very polished project, which works down to the square meter, let's say. So you have to really push the project very far during these competitions. I mean, some of these projects that we presented, we only used competition material, so you can get a sense of how far you have to push them, which then also sometimes leaves little room for a real discussion with the client. I mean, the essence of the project is very often already there, which at times is a good thing. At times, I could also imagine that it's a bad thing for the client.
Or a good thing for you. I mean, you have it in your hands if you win it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is one thing. Yeah.
But
There
just
is-
to say, the one in Schlieren is the Reformierte Kirche church who organized the competition, and they invite, like we have to apply for it and be selected. And this is a very, very nice client. Like it's really, they let us a lot of freedom, and we have very good conversations with them. But then there are other clients which are much more involved in the process of the project, and there is much more a dialogue.
But they're all one-stage competitions, no? For that scale, you just work on it behind it. And
Yeah, I mean, some of them they are selected. So you first stage of portfolio, and then you submit the proposal. But there is already a team, like 5 teams, 8 teams, etc. So some of them they are open, so everybody can apply, and others they are these 2 stages. But first stage being just by portfolio, like by showing other references. I mean, something that as a young artist you start and then you change a bit after the years is when you see competitions, you apply for everything. You just see a project and you get very excited. Now we're trying to look more who is the client, what's the vision behind, like no, like in that sense. Yeah, because the first one, but we didn't won the first one, so it was not so good. But the thing is, like, you will establish a 5-year relation with these people, and you have to have a common understanding of things. That or somehow I find singular in the Swiss case is that the agents that they do housing, they are very different. So like they can be private, public or private, or more public. Through also the Genossenschaft system, the cooperative system, etc. So the outlook of the proposals, they vary a lot. I don't know, if I compare to more the public system in Spain, there is somehow one client and all the projects tend to homogenize in one direction because the client somehow wants this kind of projects and has an ideas about living. And in this case, what I find interesting is that the output could be very different because could be a client more interested in big apartments, small apartments, open spaces, closed spaces, mixed clients in the same project. So in that sense, as a designer, it's quite exciting because you are a bit more free to propose what you think for a site and for a people is best. And I think that's a bit what this presentation shows. They are very different ideas of living in very different ways with a more, let's say, shapy plan, or more like a not any like right angle, and another plan that's really systematic, for example. Now that in other contexts, I think this would be maybe they are making me
Dialogue.
Yeah, well, I sketched it the other day in the office. I sketched something. I said, look, this is sort of the London plan. There's like 2 sketches, no? A corridor, like a corner building with apartments here and there. In the middle is the thing, and then because of fire regulation and so on, it only works like this, or you distribute it linear. And the rest is sort of how many good tiles can we afford? You know, it's crazy.
I mean, can also be read that then you do a very rigorous plan and don't realize that the jury and the client, they were wanting something different. So in that sense, like you don't know, or you have to get to know who is judging, who is building, and in that scenario, you can see what you can direction to take.
It's more like how much can you squeeze in a box and beat fire escape.
I mean, the critique we get sometimes in this thing is like the amount of glass also, no? How many windows you can afford in a building. And the first project, it was really closed 3 sides, very open one, so it's 25%, let's say. Other competitions that we done recently, they even tell you what percentage of window you can put, so you really have to calculate the area. I don't know how this is here.
I was going to ask about the facades. We talked about it a little bit earlier when we were walking around those buildings, but through English eyes, where we've got a kind of preoccupation with building in masonry, it's really refreshing to see buildings where the kind of the thinness of the envelope is expressed, and in other projects that you didn't show today as well, that's really kind of evident. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about your attitude to facade making.
I think it's a lot driven from the context, always. But we also talked about it today. It would be very nice to want to build a very heavy facade, and which maybe in Schlieren we felt was very fitting, this white painted timber, because you're really in the border between the city and the countryside, so the timber can fix up maybe on the more greenery around and the white from the city, and also with the metallic elements in the facade we wanted to pick up the industrial area close from Schlieren. But then I would say actually Halebrown, the first one presented, is actually quite heavy as a construction and facade expression. But obviously we would love to want to do a brick building, but it's yeah, in Switzerland bricks are very expensive. So we see.
And the other thing, or like something for me was fascinating at the beginning, is also, it's true that the facades are light, but they are also very thick. If you compare, I don't know, in here, but also in Spain standards, because you always need 25, 30 centimeters of insulation. And this also raises a discussion about sustainability and what is this material. It's also another big topic. But somehow you are expressing a very thin layer, but in the back you have a very thick wall, no? And I mean, this also brings to think what are the materials that they can build mass or can build thickness, and how you can, I don't know, one of the last competitions we're working now, it was also more about how you can storage energy in these things, for example, no? Like that you need. In here, I don't know, this relation between the thickness of the cladding and the thickness of the insulation, or how it's imagined. And there I think it's very much that there's a lot of thickness for climate.
Excuse me. Can I ask, sorry if I've misunderstood something. I think because of your the way you've presented everything, it's so detailed in the beautiful models, I kind of accidentally lapsed into feeling like it was all actually built.
Nothing is built.
Nothing. Okay, so the question then is, how much are you looking forward to building these, and the process? You're clearly very much into kind of making, but obviously it's a different type of making when you're working with a contractor, because you're not really making any kind of drawing, it's slightly removed from that process. Is that something that you kind of relish and look forward to, seeing how that would be different to what we've been doing so far? Or are you not particularly, you know, pretty chilled out about it?
I'm very much looking forward to it, but obviously it's very scary also. But I remember, like, the other day we saw some people buying construction site shoes, and we were already discussing where we buy our shoes.
Is it not the Swiss context helping us a little bit be excited about that? I remember working in Switzerland, having this guy doing tires in the bathroom, and he was driving to Switzerland, crossing to the Italian border, buying material there, coming back, because he was the tile guy. He was disappointed with the color of the grout.
Yeah.
So he jumped in his car and did the 15 hours drive to Milan to get the. It's a different story.
What I think is also a very interesting discussion is with the very first project we showed, like the furniture and the model for the Swiss Art Awards, we are very interested in how can we also introduce spontaneity and experimentation in how these things are made. So how can we actually, as makers, make sure that we are not fully in control over what we are actually doing. And if you look at the tender procedure, it actually forces you to do the complete opposite. If you want it to be how you imagined it, you have to decide and specify everything, so that once it goes onto site, actually everything has already been decided, and it forces you to leave as little room as possible for the contractor to work freely. And this is something that we are thinking a lot about, even though our construction sites will only start in 1 month. In that, like, how can these two things come together, or our approach to when we make things together, and in the case of a contractor, that we have to specify what is being made. And in a previous lecture where we focused much more on our making projects, that also led to a very interesting discussion about how are we going to introduce these ideas when we make things ourselves onto the construction sites we are working on. But I guess this is to continue that discussion. It would be better to talk in 1 year or 2 years when at least one of our buildings is finished.
Broken.
I mean, the thing is, like in Zurich, there's also this open event every time a building construction is finished. So if you are curious, you can visit a lot of architecture just built. You can see like the almost finished or finished building. And sometimes it's interesting because when you are building yourself, it's like really going to a class somehow. You see which brand of windows, how they are detailed. Like you can really learn a lot. A bit scary thing of that, because there is so much being built in a quite big scale in terms of housing, that everything looks very the same. And there is a very good standard of products. But when you see apartment in Bern, apartment in Zurich, apartment in the countryside, when you are inside, it feels the same. And in this discussion of thinking so much or this specificity of living ideas, how you can this apartment feel unique to the place in relation to the surroundings. So this is something that for me will be challenging, like how you can really do something that really feels also from a material sense very appropriate to the site, and that is not something that in pictures look like a building in Bern, a building in Zurich, or a building in the countryside.
So how much influence do you have over the choice of who builds your building?
I mean, that's another thing, because I mean, in public buildings, it needs to be a public procedure, so you don't know yet who will win this procedure. So somehow, like, you will not know till somehow the envelopes are open, and it's mainly about price and some.
Are you involved? Or can you be involved?
I think this Julia will know better, but apparently you can say anything. You have to be very, very quiet, because it really, I mean, it's the same as a competition for us. It's the competition for the company, so you cannot really influence. I mean, at the end, you set a standard, and then a company will be chosen, and then a different relation with this company will start.
So our best buildings are built with people where we've had influence who's built them openly, but they are interviewed by us as architects as well as client. So there's a balance between what they offer and their price. And others are just foisted on us, and they tend to be much harder work when we're building them. It's quite interesting.
For the tiles, we will ask Cornelis the name of the guy of the.
Well, this plaster guy, this plaster guy who said, I have 2 obsessions in my life. One is go-kart driving, the other one is doing plaster. Completely mad guy. So good.
Anybody else?
Have you preempted, though? You said a minute ago about letting go of things, letting the process take over. Have you thought, have you preconceived, though, what you're willing to let go of in the process coming up and constructing? There are things in your designs that you're happy for a contractor to sort of take control of?
No. Because, I mean, now it's becoming a very deep conversation, I would say, but also in our making, somehow we design what we let go, you know what I mean? Like we design the parameters, or we decide very carefully the parameters that we allow the material to do its own thing, and it's also with a lot of testing, so somehow it's also artificially created, the spontaneity. And yeah, like to now list a series of aspects that we would just give to the contractor.
Definitely not cutting doors. Not reducing doors. This we
no.
You make really beautiful models. Do you start with models, or do they tend to come later in the design process? Or
they, I mean, lately, like in general, they come in different scales, but they come from the beginning. And I mean, in this sense, I think we are quite canonical because we start with volumetric small models. So there is a lot of research more from what fits in the site, more like in a 1 to 500, 1 to 300, like this kind of scales. And then the interior ones, they come in the middle of the process somehow, like when you have already an idea of a space somehow. But you still don't know the exact shape or the exact materiality, and then they become tools for testing these things. I mean, we also work with images, with renderings, and in the office there is always a debate between, now we need to investigate something, it's a model or it's a rendering, like also because, I don't know, for example, these very precise studies of the facade, in this case they are rendering. And it's an unsolved question, no? Because it's one thing is time, the other is more having it in your hand and knowing how big it will be, how much will it weigh, like.
But yeah, we work a lot with models, and they influence a lot the way we design. We look at the models and then we arrange also the rooms differently, and it's really a part and the tool to work with.
It also has this really nice quality that when we are working very hard to meet the deadline for a competition, for example, everybody's glued against their computer screens, and then when we look together at a model, there are these rare moments where we're just all standing around an object, and it provokes a very different discussion. And what's also different to computer renderings, which we experience a lot in our office, is once a rendering is made, it sits on someone's computer, and maybe there are printouts for in-house meetings, but they demand less presence in the room. And with the models, they very often they stay somewhere in the corner, and they keep influencing the office, even though they're not specifically discussed. So that's also a very nice quality.
I mean, we saw a lot of models when we cross here, and they always are more like objects of knowledge somehow, not objects that you can look and they are saved, where in the renderings they are safe, but in a server somewhere, much more difficult to really.
I don't know if it's so much of a question, but thank you. It's really fresh and not cryptic, which I think is a comment that's made when I'm abroad about London architecture. And I think it's really enthusing to listen to you speak about observation and your experiences, and I think it's a great skill to translate that into design. I think it's an ideological position that's often spoken about, if I can say, by a younger generation, which very rarely translates into things. So I'm especially bowled over by the ability to park the words and place them next to the work and not necessarily see them as a seamless translation. I think that's really commendable. And if I try and quickly harness a question, which you may or may not want. It's the feeling of this kind of hand-drawn likeness of things in a world which I have actually little experience of, which is to do with the kind of industrialization and mechanization of construction. And this feeling that you get from things, buildings, where there's very rarely personality or emotion, and I think your work is not within that category. Although I say it, not seeing buildings, I see intentions. And I wonder, it's not such a good example, but like the Eames House in Santa Monica, which is a sort of case study, where much of the mass of the building is from the catalogue, and Ray, I think it's Ray rather than Charles Eames, drew and arranged more personal things. And it's very interesting to imagine, because that's all I can do with this work, an intention which I think is very much to do with, it's not really the right word, kind of Kunst and Werke, arts and crafts, but not in the romantic sense. And it reminds me of a building I haven't seen, but Schlieren Schminker House. And I don't know how much everything was designed. So I'm sort of rambling here at a point of question, probably because this is left on the wall, about that consciousness of when you're designing, how much you have kind of idea focuses where there'll be gesture and nuance, and how much there's material and mass that is from the building construction, which I find in my small adventures the most challenging thing. I see the canopy as a focus, a kind of idea focus, and I can imagine these small galvanized eyebrows doing something similar. And I think that's what distinguishes the work from a lot of other younger practices, in that there's clear intention to introduce back into architecture design which has a personality. So that's not really a question, it's what I think you asked for, which is and by the blank looks on your face,
getting nervous. What's another question?
Yeah, well, it's what you do at dinner rather than a lecture. Okay.
No, I don't know.
You can take this one.
If you want.
Yeah, I mean, I will answer something completely different, maybe, yeah. But I mean, for me, like this, I mean, this craft or this idea, like we were visiting before some buildings with Simon and Jacques, and like came this idea of like, I don't know, architecture has a lot of product choosing, no? Like the windows, you have very few to say, unless you have a project where you can, I don't know, a single house, like a carpenter, you can do your own product, for example. No? But in these scale projects, there is a lot of choosing and what are the elements you can actually design. No? And we were having a discussion of prefab concrete in their case, in their buildings, as element where, as an architect, you can create a form from scratch. No? Like the form is something you, as an architect, can design. It's true, in our buildings, they try to appear elements in other materials where the form comes through the user or the function or a mix of both, and then suddenly, I mean, it's also, I don't know where it comes first, the eyebrow or the position of the sunscreen. Like there is a technical, compositional, there are a lot of elements that they just concise in this moment, or like the window sill being deeper than normal, like this relation of trying to create a thicker window towards that side, but also the inside, like somehow trying to show in elements, designing few of them, and creating a new pack out of it. That this is very much in the way we think elements. Because I was also thinking, I don't know, as an architect, we have to understand that we are not doing something really cutting edge technology. Like the things we talk or do are very simple. I mean, our windows, doors, plaster walls, like in that sense, I think it's good to just accept it and try to invent or try to think about a window that has more qualities than the windows you normally see and how this can happen. So maybe it can happen a bit, in our case, at the moment, by really enlarging things or finding different relations between things that somehow speak a lot to the user and how the user perceives it from both inside and outside.
Maybe to pick up on another topic you mentioned is the handcraft or maybe also the sketches. To refer to that, I also think that we kind of stick on these old ways of sketching or model making and not using like the new inventions like 3D modeling or we use it, but it's not, we kind of hold on to the old methods as well. And I think we also, I'm not so sure if it's like a nostalgia also somehow, but we also realize that, for example, sketching is now a very effective tool to communicate, or, for example, for a construction site in Barcelona was mainly communicating with the contractors through sketches on site, and this I find always also good to realize that this is a very good and efficient tool. Also, in Vectorworks, I counted the other day, I think you can draw 14 dots after the zero precisely, 0.00. And you will never build so detailed, but you can, I think, do a very detailed sketch of a windowsill, even though not according to this like preciseness. So I think we also want to emphasize these tools still,
and because we worked in Barcelona or in here with people that is amazing sketching, and you see how powerful as a tool it is, no? Something that, I mean, the computer also, no? But when you see really people that they really can express themselves and can really, I don't know, in case of Barcelona, there are offices that they do all these big plans in by hand still, but also more like small sketches. That is something we as an architect, or at least through the education we had in school, but also in offices here, is something we cannot renunciate to.
I think there's a need for precision, and it's rare that you're standing over the contractor or the cabinet maker, preventing him from doing what you've drawn and revising it. But I think what's personally interesting is precise ideas and the translation from a sketch into a thing. And I find that a real challenge. And the precision that you're talking about, when I can find my way through Vectorworks, I quite enjoy it. Because I think it's necessary to communicate that to someone else, because we're not artists, we don't actually make anything. So the drawing document, it becomes really important.
I mean, another question I have for myself that I don't know the answer is like when I see this picture, for example, like of the model, and after we see a very similar image, very detailed of this point, is how much the building should look like the model somehow, like in that sense, where, because here there is some, I mean, it's very understandable, the space and the materiality, but there's also a big degree of abstraction, no, in this drawing, and somehow when we see it, we will see it built, and the way we detail, if it should at some point move further this in a different direction, or we should see something that stays with this. And this I don't know what is my opinion about.
That's a good answer. I don't think you'll know until you're on site. I mean, when it actually appears and you see how wide it is, I think that for me just takes a lot of experience, the understanding of how big something is in a drawing.
For example, here the eyebrows, we fix them outside. Now in the detail they are a bit more inside, so there is a shallow gap, and of course you got to do a lot of technical things, no water, blah blah blah. And, and it's how much you should stick to this image when you are detailing, or how much these other things they make reality.
But I find the first route where at one point it evolves and starts to lead also its own life far more interesting. It would be very boring if we define these models, which these ones we made more than a year ago, and they would like be always the point of comparison for the project.
Remember also once we visited a building and then the architect showed us a rendering of the competition and then a picture they took from the build project, and it was almost the same picture, and he was very, very proud of it, and I was also a bit, I had a bit mixed feelings. Is that a good thing, or is it actually nice if it appears differently?
At the same time, there are, Elisabeth Guateker, I don't know it personally, no, but there are these models from Mendes da Rocha, these very small cardboard models, like thin. And what I heard is that he built it 1 to 1,000, 1 to 500, and then give it to the people in the office, say this is the design, no? And then it gets built. But like for him, like this relation between built and model, for him was so immediate. Like the rest doesn't matter so much. You know? And now I don't know. That's what I heard. But I also find it interesting somehow how this level of abstraction. I mean, at the end, this thin paper become thick concrete. And then there were much more complicated details to solve. But for him, at least in his latest projects, I understood that his architecture a bit finished there. With that, the urban was already defined.
So
That's the framing, no?
to the pub.
Can I just ask one more quick simple question? Which is, what next for you? I mean, obviously to build these, great, but where do you, it's a lovely kind of set of work of kind of similar-ish projects with the approach and the kind of themes around home and living, and, which sit very well with those kind of projects. I just wondered, have you thought about what would happen if next is scaling it up onto larger things, and the different kind of challenges that might bring, or is it just a case of repeating the same ideas on a bigger scale? Are there new challenges? Or if you actually stopped looking at home and housing, are you interested in that? And then do you have an idea about how you might approach those kind of projects and whether these ideas are kind of transferable? What would you like to do with this as well?
What do we have to do?
What would we like to do? I mean, we now only selected housing projects. We also have some other projects. We won a competition for a Gemeindehaus, like a community or a town hall, which unfortunately was put on hold. So we are, put on hold. And also we took part in a lot of competitions for schools, which unfortunately we haven't won any of them yet. So I mean, now it looks like we have we do have a very big interest in dwelling, in this topic of domesticity, but we also investigate other programs. I mean, the scaling up, we are at the moment working on competitions for already a bigger scale. So I think it's also very much an interest, and indeed also this challenge, like how many of these ideas can we actually transpose to a bigger scale. The discussions will also change. I mean, Angel, your PhD also focuses a lot on the urban intentions of the proposals of Mario Ridolfi. So that's also an ambition of ours that with the scaling up of the project, the urban intent becomes more important. I also think that you can control it to a certain extent, the direction that our office will go, but that it's also something that is somewhat out of our hands. And we've only really been working together for 3 years, so we still have a very long way ahead of us. So I'm also very curious myself to see where we will end.
And there is something as a student, I was very much into Álvaro Siza, and I was watching his croquis, and somehow I like of architects like him is that they did so many different things, no? Like they did houses, they did public buildings, they did private houses, housing, and for me this kind of approach to architecture maybe is not the most common now, where it seems that every architect needs to have a very clear direction, no? Like I only work for public projects, I do housing, and in this media world, it's very important to have a very easy face, no? That everybody can recognize you. But if you think more as architecture as a tool for learning and a tool of curiosity, I really envy like Cesar that he knows how to build a skyscraper. He knows how a school works. He knows how, I don't know, you go from an hospital to the inside. Like it really, I find it very interesting to be able to know so much about different things you are not expecting. And now with this, I think we learn a lot about housing and about living in different places. So I don't know, for me this more open architect is the one that I admire more.
Can I ask a practical question? So when you enter competitions, do you have to have an insurance in place? Because in the UK, for an emerging practice to enter any kind of tender, you have to have like 15 million insurance, you know, or like a portfolio of field work. So how does it work in Switzerland? How is it not risk averse? Because everything we see built in Switzerland is just such high quality and built by emerging nice practices. So it's, could you please share how that to everyone?
I mean, the first competition we won, we had no insurance. So you can do it after you win it. And
Marianne, this is recorded, watch out.
So we found the office when we actually won the project, and then we settled the insurance and all the administrative things. So in Switzerland, it works actually that you can say we're planning as a young office, and the information come later. You can do that.
There's also a real interest in Switzerland to take care of the emerging offices and like continue a good practice of architecture. Now, look, I found it striking. You read the Swiss newspaper and they name the architect for the building. It's insane. It's shocking. You know? It's really like a common interest in architecture. You said a lot of the process is public. I've been to a competition, like open competition presentations where like members of the public are involved in really high-level discussions about architecture. It's something that interests people, and maybe that helps a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's big support for young offices for sure, yeah. And there's a big interest from the public, which can be good. Because one project we actually won was voted, and we got declined, and that was quite tough. And you had like the hate from the countryside saying something against your project, and that's quite difficult to accept.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Well done, Marianne.